Episode 233.
Well, here we are.
Yeah, seems so. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Scott Langdon. This week on God and Autobiography, the podcast, we debut our brand new series called Jerry and Abigail, an Intimate Dialogue. Since God and Autobiography begins with a love story, who better to discuss that love story than the couple themselves? Jerry and Abigail have a unique love story. And as they begin to contemplate that story in this discussion, their thoughts on the subject are both sweet and profound in equal measure. God is at the center, that much is clear. But no matter who you are or what you might think about God, the power of love and what it's capable of are experiences we can all relate to on some level. Here now are Jerry and Abigail. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Well, hi, sweetheart. We're going to have our first dialogue, our new series, and the place to start is obviously at the start of God and Autobiography. And I often tell people about the book, it starts with a love story. And it certainly does. And as somebody said to you at some meeting where I was talking about this, they asked, "Are you the love object?" Right? Somebody came up and, "Are you the love object?" And, well, yeah, okay.
Heavy.
Yeah,
As they say in the counterculture.
yeah. The striking thing for me is, and I tell this, is that I had not believed in romantic love, and yet this was deep, deep heels over head romantic love. I was looking for compatibility, which a lot of sensible people do, and that can make even a good life. If you have the same hobbies and values and priorities and so forth. But no, this went way beyond that. And so I ran, I don't understand this. So I ran to read the relationship books. And I just found all they do is warn you. It's not real. It's not real. It's projection. And I guess that for sure can happen. Many things like that happen to people. Nevertheless, this wasn't that. And I remember, it's as if you go to a doctor and the doctor doesn't have any concept of a healthy body, just has a list of sicknesses. And so everything is wall-to-wall illness. And I remember thinking, haven't they ever been in love? Because they just did not seem to know anything about the phenomenon they were studying. And so I thought, well, women seem to be the experts in love. What do they read? Romance novels, love stories. And so I read one that I happened to have, and here's what I write on page 3 of the book. One of these romance novels, one had been left in the place I was staying. It was the first book that really told me about love. Love is not a set of psychological triggers firing off wildly. In a sense, it's not subjective at all, not a mere feeling. It is an ontological fact, a bond between two people that is deep within the structure of reality itself. Now, that sounds pretty over the top, and yet I think I would stand by that today. If you had asked me years ago, I know this question came up my first year of grad student, what is love? Grad study, first, what is love? I thought, well, it's a feeling. It's a certain kind of feeling. Well, it's not. It's deeper than that. Does that make sense to you, sweetheart?
Oh, yeah. Well, my thinking on the interesting topic of romantic love was not formed by American psychologists or people in that life world, in that mindset. it was really formed by European women, and I guess there are a medley of influences. Partly
Why European
there,
women? You're growing up in America, right?
yeah.
So how is it women, European women,
Well,
gave you a sense of love?
my mother was European,
Ah,
and her women friends were European, and I sat like a little acolyte at their feet and drank in their wisdom, uh, and put it together like puzzle pieces with some of the literature I'd read, I guess, in French class, the romance of Tristan and Isolde, which comes magically and suddenly it's called the stroke of lightning in French parlance. The only problem with it is either in the medieval story, where they drink a magic potion and fall hopelessly and instantly in passionate mutual love, they can't live it. It's outside the boundaries of the social structure. So they live as outlaws and then they both die, which comes to the same thing. Modernized and updated, what the French believed is that it lasts a given span of time, after which point it's over. So they were of limited use, but at least they had the fact of something not exactly in the empirical stream of data, but something that interrupts that ordinary flow of experience. Then I had the biblical stories where the lead characters, the first three patriarchs, aren't even set up to do the work of God until they've got the right partner. Abraham needs Sarah, Isaac needs Rebecca, Jacob needs, though he has some other wives and concubines, Rachel. And somehow in the Jewish imagination, although most of Jacob's descendants were descended from other women, Rachel stands out, the beloved wife stands out. She's the sine qua non. Without her, there is no patriarch and there is no tribal history to follow. So that was another support from a very different direction. And it had to do with lasting in time and making an impact in the temporal flow of life and in what we call history. So I had every reason to be maladjusted in America and to take love absolutely seriously.
that's funny because I was thinking the American attitude, it's one of the great things about the American character is we're extremely pragmatic. And it makes us feel, oh, there's no problem we can't solve. There's a tremendous can-do vitality that comes from that. And we, of course, are an enterprising group of people. And so we go all out in that dimension. But it's as if people had only surface and not depth. And my compatibility thing was kind of like that. It was a personality profile, but it was extroversion, introvert, this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
And that's it. You encounter, okay, let's check you off. And sometimes I know mothers of who are ambitious for their daughters have often, whom I happen to know, or looking to position their daughters for success in life and send them to the best college where they can meet the best guy and then have the best life, but that's kind of a calculation as if you were starting a new business or something. And but the European insight that you're talking about, the feel of love, On the continent, at least in France, there's kind of a depth there, isn't there? Because it comes like a bolt, piercing
Yeah,
the surface of reality.
exactly. It cuts through vertically the horizontal flow of things. So I guess the problematic for the young girls we Fulbrights were when we went off to Paris was how to merge the uncompromised absoluteness of love, of romance, um, with ordinary life so that it would last. And the women who were in France, in Paris with me in the year of my Fulbright discussed that problem endlessly. How to capture in one real life experience the absoluteness of the stroke of lightning and the continuity of real life so that they would merge.
Yeah, if what I read is right, it's not just a feeling, it's not just a stroke, but it's deep in reality. You find the right person, it's deep in reality, and it's in those depths. And you look at how I fell in love with you, sweetheart. We were trying to save Brooklyn College, because we had a splendid award-winning core curriculum, and a new president decided, oh, well, let's junk that so that I can make my mark or something. It's just, they're often superficial in that way, I'm afraid. And you and the wonderful history professor, Margaret King, a very accomplished scholar and stout-hearted, opponent of things that are bad rather than good, of things that trash excellence. And so the two of you took on the fight, called me at my office. You called me at my office in Washington. I still have the notes. I have them framed now because at that moment I didn't know how it would shape my life so decisively. But can you help? And I said, that's what we do. And we fought it, talked daily on the phone, had to take it to the public and rally alums and everybody else. And we were talking daily because this went on for months, a fight. The administration that was pushing this through holds all the cards in these things. So you got to push very hard to get them off center. And we did that. And in the course of doing that, we had never met in person, but talk about depth rather than surface. I'd never seen your surface, and I fell in love. Well, what did I fall in love with? And I remember articulating it to myself. You fall in love with the whole person, not with this or that trait. Nevertheless, certain salient traits came through to me, and I would be interested, sweetheart, whether you can relate how I saw you to a self-understanding. Does it seem accurate, or was this itself projection? But it was two things. One was your moral earnestness. You really, in this case, what that meant was you cared about these students. You were not interested in faculty power or protocols or some cultural issue or this or that. You were interested in these young people and giving them a liberal arts education which would prepare them to bring some wisdom to their lives. And the other thing that struck me was your sensibility. You would often, after a faculty meeting or something, you'd call and give me a report. And you would say, do you want the black and white version, the quickie report, or do you want the Technicolor? Well, I always wanted the Technicolor because your sensorium is such that you take in all kinds of subtle features most people wouldn't even notice in a situation or about a person or about something you read. That's your sensibility that you bring to everything. Do you relate to those two descriptions, or does it seem very surprising someone would think of you that way?
No, not a bit. Young people you feel a terrific sense of the momentousness of having an influence on people young enough to be starting out in life, in inhaling, ingesting the um, sedimentary, layered treasures of the civilization we are standing on or in, um, and uh, and the other thing is, I talk to young people as a teacher. I have to mean what I say. They can detect the phony. They are not necessarily idealists who expect anybody to be other than phony. At the same time, they have a certain cynical contempt and weary familiarity when they come up against whomever they deem to be phony. So,
It's kind of a street smarts, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah,
the
it's
Brooklyn
not
kids,
polished and refurbished or fully equipped
yeah,
with learning or anything, but
yeah,
they are not going, you're not going to talk them into something that isn't so.
yeah. It may be kids from the Ivy Leagues don't have this particular um, uh, discernment or don't care so much about it. But on the streets in Brooklyn, it's life or death. You really have to know what you're meeting. And they have a phony detector that's in very good working order.
So if you're going to
So,
tell them that philosophy is good for them, reading Plato is good for them, they can learn something from Socrates, you've got to believe that and you've got to act on it, I guess
yeah,
you're saying. You've got
yeah,
to not be a phony.
yeah, yeah. If you're a dance teacher, you got to be in shape yourself. You know, if you're a singing teacher, you've got to know how to hit the high notes or where they're located. And if you're a philosophy teacher and you're teaching, it's a love of wisdom, the accumulated um, savvy of the centuries in our civilization, and you're a phony? You don't really believe any of this? Well, no, they couldn't pay me to do that. I have to mean what I say.
Well, that's a wonderful principle. As far as I can tell, you've lived that out. And this question about what is love, keeps coming up to my mind because love, it's said all over. It's very prominent in God and Autobiography at one point about love. Why shouldn't that be the story of the universe?
Mm.
But I'm always worrying a bit. But what is love? Well, here's one answer. It's grounded in the depths of reality itself when
Yeah.
you're really in love with someone. And
Mhm.
and it's not just pitter patter, which it often sounds like, even in religious context. Well, what is it? It's kind of a nice color that swooshes across, your screen. Uh, but is that it? And I remember telling you early on. I don't know if this made sense to you at that point. You are easy to fall in love with, but hard to love. And I said that because I think this is the language of analytic philosophers. A category in their philosophy of language is an achievement verb. To love is an achievement verb. It's like the difference between seeing and looking. Seeing is an achievement word. You didn't just look, you took it in, you saw it accurately, you saw it. And in love, well, I think the feeling, the swoon, the pitter patter is like look. And you're easy for someone to say, "Oh, Abigail, you know, won't you go in my chariot with me?" Or, whatever. "Won't you come up to my room tonight?" Whatever. But um, to love you effectively which is the achievement verb. You have to, frankly, rise to a certain level. And I think the best compliment I ever got, who was this? One of your, maybe someone who you dated or something in the past, who said this was like Jerry's great achievement. Do you know what I'm trying to refer to?
Yes.
And I remember that's the best
Yes.
compliment I've ever received. That somehow I succeeded. He could tell from the way you talked, I guess, that I succeeded in actually loving you, not just, feeling I was in love.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's about the ontological layer, that the layer of being itself, reality itself, just the opposite of what all the wiseacres tell you. They tell you it's an illusion, a delusion, you'll get over it. It's a moment of madness. It's chemistry that, you'll shake up the chemical elements and you'll be out of love. The same way you fell in because, again, somebody shook the container. But no, the end of each book of Dante's Divine Comedy, I think, if I recall rightly, ends with a reference to the love that moves the sun and the other stars. And of course, in Dante's 13th century day, he was referencing the physics of the day and the astronomy of the day, the Ptolemaic world system. And so we are all taught in the history of philosophy or the history of science or wherever we're taught about what's happened in the culture over the centuries. We are taught that we are no longer Aristotelians or Ptolemaic thinkers, and modernity has push and pull, but it doesn't have any room in it for what they call the secondary qualities, like color and sound and love, in other words, the actual world we live in. But, I don't know when physics will ramp up and go through another shakeup and maybe come out closer to the world of Dante. But I do remember, and this is not just about romantic connection between you and me, darling. When my father was dying, I didn't want to let go of my father, and I put a hand on where I believed his heart was. I'm not that great with anatomy, but it felt as if that's where his heart was. And so I seemed to have a very profound connection in that moment. And what I felt was that my father, who was also a philosopher, was communicating something to me silently. He was in a deep coma, so he was certainly not telling me anything consciously. But the matter, the thought that was running from his heart up my arm was that love is what actually makes the planets go round, what actually moves the sun and the other stars, what actually, in physical nature, just as Dante believed, moves the the subatomic particles around, and the things of a larger dimension in the universe around, moves the sun and the other stars. That's not poetry, that's reality. And I don't know when the physicists will climb up the ladder to back to what Dante knew, but I expect if they keep working, they will. They already see some kind of correlation between the viewer of subatomic particles and the particles. There's some sort of interaction or knowing or connection or sympathy. And keep going, fellas. I'm sure you'll get there, and more power to you when you do. But meanwhile, we live in a world that moderns define in terms of cold, insentient um, ultimacies, ultimate particles, have no feeling for each other or for themselves. And I think that's probably a wrong view in physics and in metaphysics and in human reality.
Yeah, I was reading a writer saying, an egg is an egg, and it's only pre-moderns who can say that. So since the 16th century, we haven't believed that eggs are eggs. We think, like Hume, that it's a stream of impressions, organized, like Kant, that no, it's you can't see the egg at all. It's off in the thing in itself or something. You don't know what an egg is. Descartes is just the secondary qualities. The egg, no, it's not a white round thing and so forth. It's not something you crack open and make an egg, cook up for a meal. All of that's sort of unreal. The only real part of the quantitative aspects, and they are far from the reality of an egg. And speaking of that love element, the older view of teleology, that you understand things best by their function, by what they are tending toward. Well, what is an egg tending toward? Well, it's going to be, if we don't crack it open and eat it, which is a violent act, Aristotle would have said, that cuts across its nature. What is its nature? Its nature is to become a little chick. And then
Big chicken.
Be a chick, and then a big chick, and then a mama chick, lay more eggs and so forth. And the language of desire is not quite inappropriate there. The seeds desire to become a tree and so forth. And that's, you might say it's metaphor or whatever, but it's a pretty valid concept. And you ask, what is an eye? I've never seen any definition that is going to be better than, well, an eye is what you see with. That's its function, right?
Yeah.
What is the eye trying to do? It's trying to see things, and it's trying to see them so much that it actually delights in seeing them. The eye enjoy. We don't just use eyes for practical purposes, seeing things for practical purposes. We do them for enjoyment, and even for seeing the depths of one another. We encounter one another visually and tactilely and so on. And that's a real person and a real reality.
Yeah. What is pleasure? Aristotle says it's the bloom on the rose. It's the sort of foam on the experience. It's the confirmation that this experience really is happening and really works, and we deeply enjoy that. It occurs to me as you and I are talking now that, after all, we are, by profession and vocation, philosophers, and that equipped us not to buy unexamined the common sense of our particular era. We know that common sense changes. It rests on the top, the surface of worldviews. And worldviews change scientifically with the history of the exploration of nature. sometimes philosophically, with the reflection on not only the sciences, but other noteworthy, important features of human experience, historical experience, sometimes shocking events that upend expectations and cause people to go back to the drawing board and say, we didn't expect this, but what should we make of this? So we know from the history of philosophy that what is called common sense is not self-evident truth. It's not the igneous rock of the planet. It changes. It itself is contingent and dependent on certain assumptions which have been in the past and will be in the future challenged. So we're not at the mercy of fashionable opinion. We just know enough about the history of fashionable fashionable opinion to know that that's not bedrock, that's surface.
Yeah, those things change all the time. And I was thinking also of literature, art, the Romantic writers, Byron and Keats and all these people shaped the mentality of a whole period.
Yes.
And became, you might say, the common sense, the common currency of that period where it's all feelings and so forth. And
Yeah.
Feelings probe reality in the deepest way or the highest way. Yeah. And later you have things like theater of the absurd, and paintings like Dali and so forth, drippy watches from the trees. And I don't know what Dali is about, but it's certainly unsettling and somehow looks rather incoherent picture of the world. Okay, there are things that turn belief upside down and inside out. I don't know what the meaning of waiting for Godot is, but Godot never shows up. And so it, looks like an exercise in futility. Or Sisyphus said to, in Camus' version, be rolling that stone up and down, up and down, up and down. And it just rolls down every single time. Okay, that's a metaphor for life.
Yeah. And these fashions in contemporary opinion rest on either philosophical arguments or experience of one kind or another. It might be that World War I shook up by its horror, trench warfare, poison gas, the expectation of progress, which had animated and made optimistic the 19th century. And I remember Henry James writing, I think, to Edith Wharton about World War I. Was this where we were tending? We have lived too long. So sometimes a shared big scale event upends assumptions that have governed the culture. Sometimes an actual change in philosophical work can't change the Newtonian assumptions of the 18th century by writing to demonstrate that they governed our rational aspect, but did not govern our intuitive and extra-rational aspect. And so a philosophical treatise, The Critique of Pure Reason, opened the door to Romanticism. Byron, Keats, and Shelley, and all those guys, whole sensibility, read Kant or read about him and decided, oh, then we can touch reality, just not with our intellects. We can touch it with the depth of feeling and sensibility. And so a whole cultural change took place. These take place. Students of the history of philosophy, students of philosophy who've lived any length of time have seen some of these changes occur, and we know it's not sacred just because everybody believes it. Everybody thinks so. Well, good for that person who thinks so, but meanwhile, the truth might lie elsewhere and has its own course of development. And you and I both, I guess, being open-minded, non-dogmatic, knew that it was quite true that we loved each other, and that was truer and rested on a deeper foundation than the conventional belief that that was impossible. That
Yeah.
we were simply victims of a kind of delusion. No, we weren't. We were observers and livers through of a depth of an experience of the depth of life, and we knew it.
And that's why I prayed for the first time, not having any beliefs, but much as you were talking about Tristan and so forth, something comes piercing through the surface of life. You know, the common sense, the facticity of life, the simple, everything is what you see, you know, and something pierces that there are further dimensions. And to me, it just seemed I didn't have had not reflected on all this as much as we're doing now, but I just thought, this is like a miracle. I didn't do anything to bring this about. Where does love come from? I don't think it's DNA. Some people would say that. I heard somebody talking, it's all just chemistry. Well, he thinks everything's chemistry. Your duty to tell the truth is just chemistry. You know, you reduce everything, and then somebody else will come along and say, oh, yeah, here are the chemicals in the human body, and they're worth $97.50 dollars and cents. This is what you cash for. Well, that's really inadequate. And at least it doesn't account. It simply fails as an explanation of actual love. And so I didn't have these, at that point, ontological reflections that came up as I went on. But I thought, you know, there's something more here. And anyway, it's like a miracle to me because I didn't make this happen. And here it is. And so thank you, Lord. Whoever the Lord is, maybe a benign universe. I didn't worry about doctrinal issues. I just was expressing, I guess, a natural reaction to reality as I had just encountered it in falling in love. And I thought, you know, you don't have to have a big theory. You're talking about, you know, saying what you mean and so forth, being truthful. What I knew was that this expression of thanks to God, whomever, was sincere. I believed it. It's how I felt. And I didn't think to express an authentic feeling required having a theory of that feeling, you know, some further set of propositions or something about it. No, here it was. I was grateful for it. It seemed amazing. It seemed miraculous. But without any theory of miracles or laws of nature or any of that stuff, which doesn't seem to get you very far in any case. But here it was, and I responded.
You say grateful. That stands out to me. A lot of people would have said, you know, gee whiz, that's amazing. People look at the Grand Canyon, I guess, I haven't seen it, and they say, wow. They don't necessarily say, I'm grateful for the Grand Canyon, you know, to whom would the gratitude be offered? Why did that word come to mind?
It is funny because I think it's a very fundamentally sound attitude. You know, if you look at the things a healthy mind, a healthy person needs, one of them is gratitude. Not what does gratitude mean? I don't know. It starts with not taking things for granted. A lot of couples, happily married for years, fall into unlove by taking each other for granted. Whereas every I told a woman helping us, your husband should fall at your knees in gratitude. It's a wonderful woman. He's very lucky to have her. And does he know that? Most men don't very well. I take that in, but he should know it. And that's why people pay attention, say you should have a date night, periodically, and, cherish this, continue the romance. The romance should not die. And I guess that's part of the gratitude is, I started thinking about miracles, because of this sense. And I thought, it almost goes back to Aristotle saying, what is it? Philosophy begins in wonder.
Yeah.
And lots of things are amazing. We take them for granted that human beings are alive, that there's a life. We're looking for life somewhere in the universe, and it seems hard to find. Why? That's kind of puzzling. We now have the ability to detect planets and galaxies and so forth very far from Earth. And yet right here, we have life. And not just life like moss, or something, but fully developed, intelligent life. Wow, that's amazing. And we have dogs. They're wonderful too, because they love you no matter, as long as you feed them, they love you. And that's wonderful. And thinking about it further, that we're conscious is wonderful. We could just be beings like robots. The rocks apparently are not conscious. One never quite knows where the limits of that receptivity to the world is. But we certainly are conscious. Well, what a blessing that is. Think how much more interesting life is because of that. And even, look at the fact of love. You could easily reproduce the species, those salmon, without love. Those salmon, as far as I know, simply feel an internal imperative to go swim up that rough river through rapids all the way up to plant their eggs in some place they're supposed to plant them. And then eventually those eggs hatch, and those salmon or whatever fish it is come down the river and into the sea, and then later do the same thing again themselves. Well, you could just have people like that. Why is affection, tenderness, the subtleties of relation of person to person in love and romance and even daily life, being appreciative of one another. That was a nice thing to say, or you look good. We have a good friend whose husband, dying at that point from leukemia, one day just looked up and said, your hair looks nice. Well, that's a nice moment, isn't it? And we have those capacities. And so it's all a miracle all the way down to why is there something rather than nothing? It would have been simpler for there to be nothing. So why is there something? And you don't know quite how to answer that sort of why question. It's sort of too basic or something. And yet it is kind of amazing that there's something rather than nothing.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.